All right, so Joe Rogan actually talked about the Brendan Schaub and Bobby Lee drama a little bit on his podcast the other day. He had Lex Friedman on, and Lex brought up how big of a fan he is of Bobby Lee, and then Joe started talking about how much he loves him and how much he wants him on the podcast, and then he got into the drama a little bit. So shout out to Lex for bringing up Bobby, because I think people definitely want to hear what Joe Rogan has to say about it. And I think a few weeks ago he kind of alluded to it, but he didn't mention anybody's name and he was really vague about it. So no one really knew what he meant or who he was exactly talking about. But this time we got him talking about Bobby Lee, and he brings up the drama, and let's see what he has to say about it.
Before, I'm a huge fan of Bobby Lee. He should be on this podcast.
I love Bobby Lee. I saw he was on your show too.
Yeah,
By the way, Bobby Lee's been invited
starstruck.
to do my podcast multiple times.
Okay,
multiple times.
But you should get him on.
I'm gonna have to reach out to him.
Yeah, I feel like he is so.
I might have to fly to LA and hold his hand and drag him on a flight.
I think he just needs a real invitation.
He knows I love him. Because there's been a lot of drama lately, and one of the things that happened was somehow or another my name got entered into this thing, and I don't want to get into it in too much detail, but I'm like, okay, I must call Bobby, and I called him and I said, listen, I don't know what kind of, I'm just hearing about this nonsense now, but I love you. I would never let anybody talk bad about you. I would never let anybody come on my show and talk bad about you. I think you're an awesome guy. I think you're incredibly talented. And I know that you have fear of like performing and putting on a special and stuff like that, but I really think you should, because I think you're one of the best comedians alive. And I've said that to him many, many times. I always give him.
So as expected, Joe just doesn't really want to be involved in it, and he's on Bobby's side, it sounds like, because Bobby was kind of stuck in the middle of this, because he's the only one that I think everyone would agree on didn't really do anything wrong here. It was just minding his own business. So from this, I would imagine Joe has a big problem with Bryan. I'm sure Brendan as well, but I think Bryan, the way he handled this situation and the way he treated Bobby, I'm sure Joe is not happy about that. And also, I think Bryan was the one to use Joe's name to threaten Bobby, which I'm sure Joe's upset about that as well. As he just said, like, they dragged his name into this, and then he had to call Bobby right after to tell him that he doesn't have any problem with him, and they're just using his name as a threat. So this is not a good look for Bryan, because if he loses his friendship with Joe, that is not good. I'm sure Joe is the main reason he still has a podcast, and he's successful doing that. And if he can't go on Rogan anymore to promote it, like him or Brendan, they're going to be in bad shape. So I want to play a clip from Joe's podcast that I mentioned here in the beginning, where Joe's alluding to one of his friends, and I don't know, it's kind of confusing what he's talking about, because he's like just so vague about it. He's not mentioning any names. He's like barely even describing what's going on. But I think he is talking about Bryan here.
They were a good friend of mine. And we were talking, and he was telling me about the story. I go, okay, do you know for sure that that's how he took it? Like, maybe he took it this way. Did you ask him this first? Did this, I want to know, did you do this work? Are you just assuming, you want to call me and tell me that you and this guy got in an argument because you want me to tell you you're right? Or do you want my actual opinion? And the only way I want to get my actual opinion is I need to know what your opinion is. And the only way I can trust your opinion is if you've looked at your own self. So if you tell me I got in a fight with this guy, man, I sat down, I thought about it. I was like, okay, was I being a dick? What did I do wrong? And then I thought, well, no, because he knew this, and I know he knew this because he brought this up. So maybe I didn't explain myself right, and so then I'll think about how I explain myself. And I was like, well, maybe they misinterpreted what I was saying and thought I was joking around, then I'll try to think of that. I'll do the work. So if I ask someone a question, if they're having an argument with someone, okay, do you know of this? And then they start raising their voice, and now fuck him. And okay, you haven't done the work. So you don't even, so you're so attached to being correct here that you're ready to dig your heels in the sand and then fight for your side, regardless of whether or not it's correct.
So I do think he's probably talking about Bryan here, because the person he's describing, it sounds like Bryan. Like, Bryan flies off the handle very easily. He seems irrational. He seems like he just randomly will act like a tough guy and not think things through at all. So it sounds like he probably called Joe to describe the situation, and he wanted Joe to be like, yeah, they're doing that to you, like, go after him. But Joe, of course, because he's a rational person that's not crazy like Bryan, he just thinks, you know what, maybe there's another side to this, or like, have you actually thought this through? Have you thought about if you're possibly in the wrong, and maybe you should just sit there and think about this for a little instead of just jumping the gun and going after Bobby like they did. It sounds like once they saw that Tiger Belly email on the Reddit account, that was it. Like full force going after them, whatever they can to take him down. And that seems like some irrational behavior, and that sounds like what Joe Rogan's describing. So this is really embarrassing for Bryan and Brendan because they're using Joe's name, and he wanted nothing to do with this. And not only that, it sounds like Joe thinks that they're in the wrong, and he feels bad for Bobby. So this is just terrible. Could you imagine if they ruin their relationship with Joe? These two are in big trouble. I also wonder if it's true that Brendan was talking shit about Bobby and Kalila to Joe, like before he went on the podcast or after it, like when he went to visit him in Texas. Because if that's true, then I'm sure Joe is just sick of these two. I'm sure he wants nothing to do with them. If like Brendan is ranting to him about how crazy and out of line Bobby and Kalila are, when Joe actually really likes Bobby. But I think that was only a rumor. I think Kalila said that she heard Brendan was talking to Joe about this when he went on his podcast. So who knows if it's true, but I mean, it sounds like a possibility. I wouldn't put it past him. If they're already using his name and everything, and they already took things this far, I could imagine Brendan going to Joe and just going off on Bobby and Kalila and trying to use Joe to his advantage and trying to use him to take them down. So I think to clear everything up here, Joe should do a podcast with Brendan, Bryan, Bobby, and Kalila. Could you imagine? I know that would never happen, but that would be amazing. If Joe was like the mediator and he's trying to squash the beef between them, that could be his most viewed podcast. Nah, but I do hope Bobby goes on his podcast because I'm surprised he hasn't been on there already. Joe has like all those people that Bobby hangs out with, like all the same people on, but just not Bobby. I'm shocked by that. It sounds like Bobby just might be nervous though, especially since Joe has such a massive platform. But it is good to hear that Joe called him up right away to let him know, like, hey, I don't have any problem with you. These guys are out of line. Like, it sounds like that's probably what he said. So it's good to hear that Joe did that. I'm sure that helped Bobby out a lot because it sounded like he was really stressed out when Brendan and Bryan called him up and just went nuts on him, even though he probably had nothing to worry about because these two goofballs, they can't do anything right. Literally everything they tried to do backfired. I mean, them using Joe Rogan's name, how did they expect that to work? Joe's an actual sensible person that doesn't just fly off the handle. Like, he's not going to just hear you guys say, hey, Bobby's going after us on the Fighter and the Kids subreddit, help us out. Like, there's no way he'd just accept that and be like, oh yeah, he's out of control with this. I can't believe he's up to this. Of course he sits there and thinks about it and doesn't just attack him like a maniac. So it'll be interesting to see if Joe has Bryan or Brendan on anytime soon, and obviously Bobby. But I really want to hear what his relationship with Bryan is, what that's like now, because these two have gone back, like, I think they were friends since like the 90s, and now it sounds like they're probably not on the best terms. And obviously Bryan and Bobby are on terrible terms and they might never be friends again. But Bryan really screwed things up here. I mean, he is terrible at handling these situations. Brendan just puts like the worst team around him. It's crazy. And Brendan and Joe have already given Bryan a lecture about his whole tough guy persona. It was just hilarious. I talked about it in this video. You can go check it out if you want. And that's about it for this video. Thanks for watching. Make sure you hit the like button, leave me a comment, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you at the next video.